You might remember this from Computex last year or CES just recently. It is finally here. This is the Matcha Green Thermaltake TR100, and let's dig into this one. Welcome to Machines More. The version we saw at CES earlier in January is pretty much production ready, and that's what we have here. This is going to be a full review of the case. I'll walk you through the features and some testing, and I'll give you my recommendation. And while it's far from the smallest small form factor case, I think there's plenty of reasons for builders to choose this one. It is a very fun case. Before I dive in, I want to thank Thermaltake for providing the test app on some of the accessories for review today. I did want to let you know that, as with all the reviews on this channel, they are not paid for by the manufacturer, and you can expect a fair, objective, and well-researched review opinion today. If you enjoy content like this, please go ahead and click that subscribe button, since it really helps the channel grow, and big thanks. The TR100 is a new sandwich-style small form factor case from Thermaltake. TR, from what I can gather, signifies that this is a travel product. In fact, at CES, they went as far to show their hard-sided suitcase that this could go in. But other than the fact that this is smaller than other Thermaltake cases in the current lineup, there's actually nothing specifically travel-friendly about this case, right? It doesn't convert into a roller. There's no handle, even. It's not a particularly compact, small form factor case either. It measures in at 379 millimeters long, excluding the protrusion from the GPU hanger, by 179 millimeters wide by 294 millimeters tall, including the 24 millimeter tall feet. So the math works out to roughly 18 liters without feet, or 19.9 liters with them. If you are thinking to throw this in a suitcase regularly, I would still prefer closer to 10 liters. A T1 V2, I've traveled with a T1 Reference and Fractal Terra type of case. So dimensionally, I think this one is still quite large, though, for that purpose. Thermaltake quotes this case at 18.4 liters, so obviously they don't want you to count the feet. But notwithstanding that fact, the feet are actually an important feature here. They elevate the case at a very suitable distance, that's 24 millimeters, away from the work surface, and that will aid in good ventilation for this case. In this size segment, you also have sandwich cases such as Fractal's Aero 2, and more standard layout cases such as the Cooler Master NR200, and you also have the vertical-only Cooler Master NR200 PV2. Okay, so most of the case is painted steel. There's some plastic parts as well. The overall material quality here feels slightly better than NR200, but definitely below that of something like the Lee & A4H2O, which uses aluminum. The side panels you just slot in, and they are fully magnetic closure, right? And like I mentioned, painted steel panels, a lot of fun colors that they're coming in. These are ventilated, but only the bottom section is ventilated. The area that's adjacent to where the radiator go is not. On the motherboard side of the case, you have provisions for an inverted mini-itx motherboard. So whether it's a CPU block or an air cooler heatsink, you have officially 68 millimeters of clearance. There is some tolerance built in. Off of the IHS of an AM5 CPU, I've measured closer to 70 millimeters to the outer panel. So I think there's enough wiggle room that if you're willing to try to fit, say, a Noctua L12S, you may be able to get there. Directly to the left of the board is where the power supply goes. You can fit an SFX or an SFXL power supply. There's a cage for it, and you can vary the position of this cage. For the bigger SFXL, you're definitely going to want to place it in the lower position because it is going to stick out more. Otherwise, you'll be too close to the top. And for SFX, you can do either. On the GPU side, your card is going to connect with an included Gen 4 riser cable, and there is a removable bracket which can pre-install to the card to help support your more unwieldy cards. There is, as you can see, space for a very large card. This 4080 Super that I have here, the Founders Edition card, is already a very big card, and you can see there's still a ton of room here. The official spec is 360 millimeters on the length and 70 millimeters on the thickness. So, for example, they showed the case with a Strix card at CES. Those 4080, 4090 coolers measure in at 358 millimeters long and 70 millimeters thick, and 149 millimeters tall. So you won't be able to fit the monstrosity that is the new Astral from ASUS. But with this much clearance, you should be able to fit an MSI's Vanguard cooler, which is 357 millimeters long by 66 millimeters thick and 151 millimeters tall. And that is a huge card. We'll get to the rad details up next, but I'll note here that the thickness of your rad plus fans at the top will to some extent dictate how tall of a card that you can run. So you won't ever be able to run a rad and fan combo that goes lower than this center spine section here. But keep in mind that you will need room for your power connector, which you do not want to put too much pressure on with a tight bend. So right here, you'll see this. It does not have any pressure on it, but if this were a taller card, you might see this get some pressure on it, and that's not good. With a standard thickness 27mm rad and 25mm fans like I have here, this max card height will be roughly 150mm, with the caveat that a more rigid power connector, so they're not all like this, or a more flush connector, which, you know, one like the Founders Edition card is pretty much at the edge, that could reduce how much clearance you have. But yeah, with 52mm of rad plus fan commitment, a 149mm tall card like the Strix that they showed is pretty much close to your upper bound. If you are air cooling and it's just fans up here, you know, you will have plenty more room. Although even the biggest of cards aren't really going to get that much wider than those Strix cards. So using this guy is optional. You don't have to use it, but the case comes with this GPU support foot. There's an inside bracket, and this outer piece will secure the card after it's installed. If you're using this for travel, I could see this being a nice peace of mind thing. Otherwise, I don't think it serves too much purpose if it's just sitting on a desk. Top of the case pops off with a thumb screw. Radiator. At the top, you have a removable bracket which supports up to 280 or 2x140mm fan. Of course, you can use a 240 or 120. I noted that unless you are using a 140 or 280, you can't actually center the rad if that's what you want. For example, a 240, because you've got 1, 2, 3 slots here and then 1 slot here, that's going to be biased to one end of the case. There's not actually too much thickness clearance though. The bar over the riser cable is your hard stop. To that point is 60mm, but there's a possibility that the riser cable is going to bulge up like I have here, or other cables that are interfering with the rad. So placing the radiator on the inside and then your rad fans on the outside may not be a bad idea to avoid stuff getting caught in the fans, and that way you don't have to use fan grills either, because you actually don't have too much space. The front of the case has a ventilated section right here, and it is split into 2 sections. The top part is interchangeable with an included cutout panel, and that's one I have installed here with their optional 3.9-inch LCD display, which I tested out. The lower section is ventilated, and the front panel I/O, it's fully equipped. You have a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, 2 USB 3.0 ports, 1 HD audio, power button with LED, and you have an HDD LED, and a reset button. So that's the full house there. So very nice. You can actually remove the bottom of the case if you want to clean up your cables at the very end or access the top edge of your motherboard, because it's now flipped upside down. That could come in handy that way. One thing that's really neat is on these panels, on the side panels and top panels and the front, anytime there's an opening, it's got a dust filter. The dust filters actually are easily removable for cleaning. These are all also magnetic, so it's very convenient. And then finally, for storage, the case natively supports up to 2 2.5-inch drives. The edge of your drive will just screw in directly to the chassis, and one can go on either side of the case and sit flush or almost flush with the front panel. The case does build up quite nicely, and there's plenty of space and flexibility. You can remove both side panels and the top panel. And as mentioned, I did swap out the front panel for the LCD display. It's a $90 optional display, so it's not cheap. But if you're into that, it's kind of fun. It gives the case some individual character. The display connects to your USB 2.0 header. Now, you don't have to pre-run your riser cable, but I did. One other option is you can also attach it to your card first with the bracket off and then place everything back in together. Once your panels are off, you can slot the board in and just figure out how your cabling will go. For most of your front panel cables, the ideal way is to route into the channel between the power supply cage. I used some of their included Velcro straps, which I split in half to make it a little bit more manageable. You can also run your power supply cables, such as the EPS cable, through this area. The 24 cable will kind of snake through the section, as you can see as well. One important thing is to make sure that you run your AC power cable down and through the bottom cutout before you place the power supply cage back in. Because the ports for your power supply face up, it's very convenient to connect the cables It's a similar setup to Fractal Era 2, but it's easier to get into this case because you don't have to take off that outer shell. And this is good for maintenance as well if you want to add things down the road. So with that done, you can make sure your cables are tidy and then turn your attention to the graphics card. As mentioned, the bigger cards can attach to the bracket first. You can just unscrew that bracket, but if you can slide your card in as is, that's kind of the way to go. It's easier that way, I think. Either way, just make sure you attach the Gen 4 riser cable to your motherboard. And you can attach the GPU foot like I used here as well. You do have to watch out where you place it though. With my 4080 Super, the back part of that support foot shouldn't be near the flow-through fan, which is on the other side of the GPU. And you can see here that if you're not careful, that can get right there. Finally, if you're doing an AIO, you can mount up either your fans to the rad plate, or you can do the rad directly on the outside and put the fans on the inside. So either way it works. I put the rad on the inside here, like I mentioned. Go ahead and attach the CPU block to the motherboard, and then place the radiator assembly over the case and screw that in. And since you don't have as much clearance, the radiator on the inside is going to keep the fans safe from dangling cables or anything like, like this bulging riser cable like I mentioned. You can set up fans as intake or exhaust, and we'll discuss the merits of each setup shortly. Just close everything back up at that point. They're magnetic panels, so if you forgot something, it's really easy, just pop it off here. With this build, I have a ASUS B850 ITX motherboard. I did test both Ryzen 7900X and 9900X, 32 gigs of Thermaltake's tough RAM. I have Thermaltake's 850-watt SFX power supply, and this is a matching matcha green TH280V2, and that looks very, very nice when it's all the same color. And this is kind of a unique color too, so it's kind of fun. On the GPU side, I didn't get a 50 series card in time with the build yet, but 4080 Super Founders Edition here. For thermal testing, I use a slightly different kit. For comparability, I try to standardize my components that I used for the thermal testing part of case reviews, and that does mean the older components. The results here are with a 7900X plus a 240mm Cooler Master Atmos with Fantex T30 fans. And on the GPU, I'm using a Radeon 6800 XT. So the 7900X pulls 165 watts in CPU rendering. I do lock the clocks and voltage down for testing, and for gaming, the 6800 XT pulls about 265 watts. Let's take a look at the CPU rendering scenario here. You do have two options for your fan orientation. The intake is going to favor the CPU temps by only about 3 degrees here for the 7900X. So either way, these are good temps relative to the comparison cases. The ones within that same volume tier will be your Era 2 and NR200, and the TR100 compares very well. With a 9900X running on PBO, the thermals are perfectly fine as well. The stock PBO clocks are as expected. So if you're curious, the TH280V2 AIO did not fare quite as well. These temps with the 7900X are only possible because I've locked down the voltage, but this is absolutely not sustainable at the noise equivalent RPMs when compared to the T30s paired with that 240 Cooler Master. So with this setup, you're going to have to dial up fans a little bit faster because this is not as strong a combination. For 1440p gaming here, the top exhaust is going to favor the GPU, since rad fans exhausting at the top will help the GPU by pulling away the exhaust and encouraging airflow in through the side panels and feeding the graphics card. So here there's almost a like-for-like flip if you compare against the top intake. For most gaming builds where the CPU temps aren't that critical, it would make most sense to set up as an exhaust, but do keep in mind that as your GPU power increases based on the card that you choose. For my test here, it's a 265 watts on the GPU in a not very CPU intensive scenario. This is 1440p gaming. Also for reference, for the setup that you see here, the TH280 AIO V2 setup as a top exhaust with the 4080 Super, which has similar board power draw as the 6800 XT for gaming. The Founders Edition card does quite well in this scenario, and it's actually quieter. So I would say if you're planning on 50-90 levels of GPU power, they may get to a point where running a top exhaust will have too much of an impact on the CPU temps, and you may want to opt for a top intake instead. When I get a 5080 in here, I will retest it, and I'll kind of share some thoughts in general about case setup. Overall, though, thermals are quite competitive. They're quite similar to the NR200 PV2 in a dual exhaust configuration for both CPU rendering and gaming CPU GPU temps. In a CPU rendering scenario, it does compare favorably against the Era 2 from Fractal Design, and with better gaming GPU temps. The case doesn't cause any undesirable noise interactions with any of the components I tested. The side panels are just standard filtered panels, but I will note that this is a very acoustically transparent case. So the front panel, it's going to let a lot of the sound come through as well because it's basically a hole here. Okay, I've got these rad fans running at about 1250 RPM. The GPU is idling. So just to give you an idea of what it sounds like, you can still hear what I'm saying, right? But like I said, it's kind of an acoustically transparent case. So I can pop these panels off. All right, and there's mostly no impact on the acoustics from attaching panels. So it's good and bad, right? There's no interference with the case panels, but there's also not really any insulation from that. Okay, pros of the case. Easy to build in, I would say beginner friendly. The panels come off easily. Convenient touch points with the magnetic closures. You really don't ever feel cramped when building this, except for perhaps the spacing between the radiator and the riser cable. That section is a little bit tight. The PSU orientation is convenient as well for cable management. You have plenty of dedicated cable management points as well. So a big strength of this case is that GPU compatibility. It's a bigger case, and a lot of that volume is dedicated to being able to run a big card, significantly more than the NVIDIA SFF ready dimension. So if that is what you have planned, this is the ticket. Front panel I/O, it's complete. This is best in class, right? You have everything here. And as tested, the thermal performance is top tier. The legs are not skimpy, and the generous elevation here contributes to good airflow. There's going to be some trade-offs that are inherent to sandwich-style cases with regard to exhaust versus intake, but that is just the nature of this type of airflow setup in a sandwich-style case. Another strength, dust management is well thought out and completely integral to this case. It's really easy to clean these filters and maintain the case and just pop it off. Finally, this is a fun-loving case. If you run the LCD display and you pick a color that you like, I think you'll be able to get a very easygoing and entertaining setup that will put a smile on your face every time you see it. So in general, I found a lot more to like about this case than dislike, but there are just a few cons that are more so situational depending on what you are after. So first off, it is a case on the bigger end of the SFF volume spectrum, and there are plenty of benefits to having this much volume. However, if you aren't looking to run an AIO, or at least not looking to run a 280, and you're not building with a behemoth of a GPU, then you are actually adding a lot of volume that you're not necessarily going to need, and that's not going to do you any good to have that bigger footprint. The thermals are good, but for a case this size, no fans other than just at the top is not as strong as it could be. This case is similar to Lian Li's Q58 with more volume, and there you have a bottom case fan. They actually outset the bottom case fan. Era 2 gets you 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, so TR100 is slightly behind in that regard. Even though the thermals are pretty good, having that case fan will allow you to fine-tune or at least customize your airflow to what you want. Lastly, if you're perfectly fine with the allocation between the card and the motherboard spacing, then great. One thing that a lot of sandwich-style cases have been implementing since the FormD T1 V2 is an adjustable spine. This case doesn't give you that flexibility, and while it will be fine for most AIO builds, there are better cases for air cooling since you cannot choose to delegate some of your unused GPU space to a bigger heatsink so that you can fit more CPU, or vice versa. You can run a bigger GPU at the expense of a smaller air cooler. Reference pricing for the case is $120 US, so as of right now it'll come in black, white, hydrangea blue, or this matcha green, and there's 2 more fun colors to come that they showed at CES, and that's going to be released later on. For $120 US, you get the case plus the PCIe 4.0 riser cable, and my gut feeling is that some prospective buyers are going to think it's priced high. It is actually the same as the NR200P V2, which isn't the sandwich style layout, but similar volume, and it is mandated to use a riser cable as well, which it includes. And I actually think that this case beats out the NR200P V2 by just a hair. The touch points, the materials are slightly better, and I think there are more fun colors available here. So in that sense, I don't think it's that unreasonable. By comparison, the Fractal Era 2 has a similar layout, and that is about $200 US. What you get there is much higher material quality, even more attractive look and the feel about the case, but the colors there are a little bit more businesslike in its approach. If you don't need all the compatibility for a 280 and a bigger GPU, Lian Li's Dan A4H2O is still a solid sandwich. It does cost a little more at around $150 US, but there you still have higher material quality, also an excellent case, and it is significantly smaller. So that is where this case slots in, and I think it's a sensible entry point. So let's sum this one up. Bigger SFF, but a fun bigger SFF, 280 AIO plus big 50 series GPUs, no problem. Convenient features, excellent thermal performance, and if you are looking for something that is lighthearted and you don't need the most compact setup, case that is easy to build in and maintain, then I think this is definitely one to check out. If you enjoyed this, I'd love for you to click that like button. Also, please make sure you're subscribed. The case should have retail availability today, so go ahead and check out the links below. Big thanks for watching.